going to start with poetry and jump in a kind of a chronological way through my poetry life. Excuse me. And the first poem, seeing as we're in Maynooth, this is a very early one, which I probably wrote in maybe the very early 80s or late 70s. It's called Maynooth College, August, and Martin and I, after we got married, we used to play tennis in the old tennis courts on the old campus, and it was really beautiful in summer. Apart from the fact that he always beat me, but it helped me get better. And I was very conscious of the clerical students who had been in the philosophy class that I was in as a student, and they all arrived in their soutanes in September, these young boys. And then, of course, there is a lovely cemetery here, which is full of the graves of young boys who probably died from tuberculosis. So, Maynooth College, August. A cloistered place, the drench of lime flower on tennis courts of a summer evening. New clerics, peach fuzz on chin, like sleep in the eyes of children, fervently soutaned. From the Bible, doves, pampas grass, a sundial. From sleep to sleep, a mystic cloying. The monkish garden, florid blooms, streams, capricious ghosts. I love and loathe such places. Echoes of purple twilights on crumbled tennis court, the occult haunt of bats and owls. A hard game, watched, applauded by tubercular boys from a silent century, their graves and little crosses the resting place of swallows. And still staying back a bit in the past, as anybody in my age group who came through the 1970s, we were terribly conscious of the idea of nuclear war and atomic energy and all that sort of thing. And I was really quite obsessed with it. And I was convinced, my early fiction as well, the very first short story I had published dealt with it was a dystopian post-apocalyptic landscape. But this poem is called Atomic Elegy, and it runs in a kind of question and answer style. And I was very young when I wrote it. Who will survive? There will be hordes. Hunger will consume them. Then there will be others, but no more temples. Morning and evening, scorched days, grave silent nights. Memory will survive, as with us. Will they smelt the spider wisps that crystal harvest grasses? Yes, they will grid on phantom soil. I plant sunflowers in the spring, eat the seeds in autumn. They will not stretch broad stems, bare yellow faces for the sun. This woman's grandchild birthed a son last night. They drank from silver goblets. He might tease beetles in his infancy. The old woman laughs, her soul sips fourfold joy. She is saved and soon will sleep. What of our prints, our songs? I guard rare books, ochred pages. Even books betray, you did not learn. I am moist with wanting, my skin is naked. Your shadow marks you even in the night. My love, what of his beauty, his young neck and curling hair, his want sunning on me? I sleep in his skin, he in mine. You must leap together. And I have quite a lot in this book, The Place of Miracles, which was my new and selected poems, and it came out in, I think, 2005. When I was growing up in Monaghan, I heard, it wasn't just a story, a man disappeared. He went swimming in Amy Loch, which was outside Emmy Vale in Monaghan, and he vanished without trace. And of course, in those days, some people would say, oh, that's a bottomless lake. No, he'll never be found, it's bottomless, that kind of thing. And, but of course, about 15 or 20 years later, he came back. And he had it was a way of maybe getting out of his marriage or something. He had gone off to Scotland and he came back. And I don't know what kind of reception he got. But in any case, this is the woman of the loch. People would talk about getting out of situations or facing up to things, about cute whores or brave wee souls. She always said, perhaps, maybe, we'll see how it works out. But late one summer night, she went. Few saw her wade in or recognized the yellow swimsuit, the red rubber hat with half-perished daisies. The water was like silk on her chest and arms. That border lake smelt sweet with secrets as she front crawled to the deeps they said were bottomless. All those dawn swims amounted to something, the frustrated pleasure of being on her own, an hour between the panic of a teething baby and the habit of a husband's face. At least she got the swimming right, dipped, duck-arsed, learnt to hold rage as long as it took. Deeper she went, further and deeper across the silent loch, smiled to herself when she glimpsed the bottom they said wasn't there. Greenish-brown, matted sludge, then patches of sand, the fish avoiding her. She was afraid of nothing. The night she left, she dove beneath, emerged at the far side, newborn, slid into the waiting car. By the time the boats came, she was long gone. Her swimsuit, her hat floated in the dark. Years later, she returned from Scotland. People said she'd risen from the grave. And will you stay, her husband wondered. Perhaps, maybe. We'll see how it works out. This is I suppose it's a dark-ish poem too. As we know, within the conventions that support our lives, all kinds of things happen and maybe are not listened to or heard. And this poem is called The 60s Wives, and it's based on a photograph that I saw. In my mother's wallet, it brings them all to life, those wives at afternoon tea in the YMCA hall. Mother and her sister smile out, cosseted and married. Stylish Chanel navies and a dash of red, hats with upturned brims. How lovely the hats, how treacherous the poise, each woman on the edge of her chair, around a small table of pink cups and iced buns with lumps of sugar that meant an occasion. The friends beside them smile too, sparkle at the camera's attention, have settled their folded hands, turned the energy of pale arms into the dark warmth of their palms. Later, the prettiest one was called crazy because she shaved her head, unable to have what she craved, curls, elusive power. Later still, her husband's admiration of another woman's coat became a monument to her rage. The rest stayed tranquil as Valium, but she, extreme to the end, took one step further and drank weed killer. Now, well, let's see, am I okay time-wise? I'm okay. The rest of them will be shorter than this poem. This one is called Unlegendary Heroes, and I read it because it is my favourite poem of anything I've ever written, I think. And it's based on PJ, or it was inspired by PJ Duffy's Landscapes of South Ulster. That's PJ Duffy of the Geography Department here in Maynooth. And he published this marvellous book, Landscapes of South Ulster. And in it, I found an excerpt from a 1938 folklore survey, which records the local people in the South Ulster parish landscape. And I excerpted a little of that and noted that these were all male achievements of a sort of a lighter kind, really. And I thought I must remedy this now I believe there actually is, in fact, an inventory of women's achievements, but I didn't find it at the time, so I have invented these ones. On legendary heroes. So here are the men. Patrick Farrell of Lacca, who was able to mow 1 acre and 1 rood Irish in a day. Tom Gallagher, Cornamuckla, could walk 50 Irish miles in 1 day. Patrick Mulligan, Cremartin, was a great oarsman. Tommy Atkinson, Lismagunshan, was very good at high jumping. He could jump 6 feet high. Edward Monaghan, Anna, who could stand on his head on a pint tumbler or on the rigging of a house. So I moved on to the women, and I took the place names from Duffy's Atlas, because I love these place names. They're so far removed from, the kind of addresses and localities that we have nowadays. Anyway. Kathleen McKenna, Anna Gola, who was able to wash a week's sheets, shirts and swaddling, bake bread and clean the house all of a Monday. Birdie McMahon of Falkland walked to Monaghan for a sack of flour 2 days before her 8th child was born. Septa Duffy, Glennon, very good at sewing, embroidered a set of vestments in 5 days. Mary Mccabe of Derrynashallog, who cared for her husband's mother in dotage, fed 10 children, the youngest still at the breast during haymaking. Mary Conlon, Tully who wrote poems at night. Assumpta Meehan, Tony Garvey, saw many visions and was committed to the asylum. Martha McGinn of Amy, who swam Cornamundon Loch in 1 hour and a quarter. Miss Harper, Corley, female problems rarely ceased, pleasant in ill health. Patricia Curley, Corlat, whose joints ached and swelled though she was young, who bore 3 children. Dora Houston Stranani died in childbirth, aged 14 years. Last words, Daddy, oh Daddy. Sorry, Mammy, oh Mammy. Rosie McCrudden, Ahabog, noted for clean boots, winter or summer, often beaten by her father. Maggie Traynor, Dona, got no breakfasts, fed by the nuns, batch loaf with jam, the best speller in the school. Phyllis McCrudden, Knockafubble, who buried 2 husbands, reared 5 children and farmed her own land. Anne Moffat of Ena, who taught people to read and did not charge. And to my surprise and pleasure, last week I discovered that poem was selected by the Poetry Foundation in Chicago as their poem of the day. So it's one that's on their website permanently, so I enjoy the fact that it has another life, perhaps, as well. Now these poems are, I'll go for the Ark Builders, which came out in 2009. I'm sure there's no woman here who has had very much cosmetic surgery, but I'm going to read this anyway. I'm, like a lot of people, I'm very taken by the art of Frida Kahlo and also, of course, her life. But I like to separate the life of an artist from the work. I think it's really important because frequently artists let us all down. It's the work that is more important. But in her case, we can't avoid seeing her and the wonderful monobrow and the moustache and the body hair that is left alone. So this poem is sort of tipping at the contemporary need to be bald and, the the little injections of the person who gives Botox and that sort of thing. Following Frida. That monobrow wouldn't work today. Girls wax the in-betweens, the ups and downs, smooth, smooth. Sometimes the greenery around the hacienda itches so much we sneeze and tickle, create unnecessary frowns, a slippage. There's always Dr. Death, of course, his bright smile, that happy mouth inviting us to pout and make kiss shapes. Kiss, 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 he urges. His short needle makes cushions of our worries. Little prick here, another there. There, there. It's all right, darlings. Growing old needn't hurt so badly. The hairs remind us, marching to link brow to brow, shadowing our lips. We want to be Frida, earnest with hair, mocking Dr. Death's short needle before it punctures our flesh. Old, old, we shout the words he hates, loose and old, not tight and old. Senses raging, in need of colour, as we behold ourselves mirror-wise. The women we always were, just older, looser, still there. The poem I'm going to read now, I'm reading it for Helen Fallon because she said she rather likes it. And it's a poem that I have two versions of. It appeared in a previous collection. It appeared in this book in one version. And then the editor of this book, who saw that I wanted to slip it into the collection, said he thought that I should rewrite it. So I did rewrite it. It's a poem about the environment and the ice melt and what's happening to animals. The earlier one depends a lot more on metaphor. I actually prefer it, but this is the newer version. And it's called Heat. The once blue ice is turning grey and soft. Out on the wastes, rumours of skilled hunters, long plunged beneath ice that tore like skin. White bears head for the suburbs, loose pelted, drawn by the reek of leftovers to raid trash cans, rubbish tips. Every winter their daring grows, despite varmint rifles, men who press the rounds in, shoot into the night, then aim again, their breath a whisper of ice with each retort. The bear's earth has lost its touch. Paws and claws no longer feel stability on the deep ice plateau. The only message is of Earth's dementia, her watery heart fibrillating. A huge gate swings back, water flows, no longer rigged in cliffs to the ocean bed. Melt-brained, the ice slides south, deserting the animals. Arkless, fox, wolf, and bear forage towards the towns. I sometimes say that to some extent, writers do not always definitely know what they're doing when they write a poem. You can have certain things prepared, notes made, certain little things in place, or something can just happen and you start to make connections between that something and other things. And so it was. This poem is called Garage Events, but a couple of different things come to play in it, and it's probably mysterious in its way, although essentially it's about a mistake I made thinking I was picking up a mouse. But it's also about other things, and I hope that that's how it works. So, Garage Events. Where you hid the letters beneath the gas cylinder. Where once you both restored a desk, rushing to the blonde wood panels, the green leather surface, a lake lean with light from the evening sun, forgiving as you swam together in the ease of doing. where you also found a rat in a potato barrel, mistaking it for a large mouse. Your fingers hooked gently beneath the heart-bobbing belly. You lifted it free, noting the long ringed tail, those unblinking brown eyes. Small rat, surprised, shocked, did not bite, but hung there, a minky curve in the O of thumb and finger. You lowered it to the wood pile. It paused, then slipped silently within catacombs of dried birch, poplar, safe in the dark. I'm going to read Baltic Amber. It's a poem about growing older, really, and hitting the 6th decade. And someone said I would uncover pieces of amber from long dead trees on this Baltic shoreline. Day by day, I leave the cottage, walk the sands to a headland village. Nobody understands what I mean when I mention amber. Their minds engrossed by hazel branches hung with painted eggs, catkins, or hyacinths in bowls. The time for hyacinths is long gone, I tell them. I am in need of something that has survived more than winter, hardening to translucent gold, enclosing, perhaps, one small seed to honour the month and the Easter I was conceived. I have grown 6 decades like aeons, and my tears have surely become like amber, enriched and smooth, taking tawny colours for blood. Next week, I will be casual about the search, will uncover nuggets beneath tree fragments, inhaling salt and resin as I turn freely from eggs, catkins, those April fevers. And here's an example of sort of liberties that you take if, you know, I needed to keep things in the spirit of renewal and Easter and Eastrus and that sort of richness where life is being renewed. But of course, although my birthday is near Easter, I couldn't have been conceived then. I was conceived in July. But in the poem, keeping everything, I just wanted to keep that whole thing together. And so we do take those, you bend the rules according to the work at times. And just one more poem and then I'll move to a little bit of fiction. This one is called Feeding the Crone. So you all know about the crone in Irish folk history and mythology, and she's an important and powerful figure, and it's hard not to have absorbed something about her or maybe even of her if down in some way down the years. The only time I ever believe I've had what I'll call a crone dream was when I was once in County Kerry, and I had gone out at night for a drive. It was somewhere near Doonqueen, and I was trying to reverse back and turn around on a very narrow road. Fortunately, I had the window open, and I suddenly realised I was very, very close to the edge. And anyway, I got the car turned around, and the lights swung up against this massive stone cliff mountain wall, and with all their shadows, and I headed back. And a few nights later, I had a dream about this old woman at that very place, pointing me in the right direction. And that's all. It was just, it lingered in my mind, but I always remembered her. Feeding the crone. The crone is knocking on my door. Despite myself, I open. A north wind gusts in. Any chance of a cup of tea, she asks, conciliatory. as if we hadn't been through this rigmarole several times already. I wouldn't begrudge a person the chance to wet their lips. I'd throw in a biscuit or two, not to mention a slice of the cake my daughter made yesterday. That's what she needs, a young girl's cake, duck eggs and spelt flour, nutmeg and bitter butter, her generous finger sifts. I slip the Crone a huge triangle, knowing she won't say no. Blue and white frosting sidle down the sides, stick to her fingers, make their way to sweeten her mouth. She swallows and licks, casts a glance at the cake a second time. Again, I cut deep to fill her sagging belly. What else would I do? By the time she's done, she hesitates in the doorway, a smile almost cracking her jowls. That was some cake, she whispers, turning away, patting herself as if she was pregnant. Now, I'll move on to a bit of fiction, just from my latest book, Empire. This will take about 10 minutes, I would say. And these stories they're all interconnected. They're set between 1915 and 1919. Well, strictly speaking, 4 of them are interconnected, 4 of the 7. And a couple of them are longish stories, all right. The political changes are there in the background, not in the foreground. What is foregrounded is the lives of ordinary people, interesting people, progressive people, poor people. Because in my research for this book, I was struck by how absolutely progressive people were. They were as progressive then as we imagine ourselves to be now. And that was very striking. So I'm going to read from a story called The Moss Picker. And I'm just going to read the opening section and then move quickly. Gradually, moss picking occurred on the Bog of Ireland, a Bog of Allen, and in Canada, and wherever there were bogs towards the end of the First World War. And the moss has highly antiseptic qualities, which were used they were better than ordinary bandages. So they were sent off to places like Salonika and everything. Gradually, the sound penetrated the homes on both sides of Hill Street. The Missy's coffee darted out like wrens to hover on their doorstep. The spinster Campbell daughter stood frowning, and Florence Duffy drew her sons, who had been playing on the street, close to her skirt as the hullabaloo built. Town smells drifted on the air, smoke from coal fires up and down Blasloch Street, stew from the Missy's Coffee's kitchen, visceral smells from the abattoir which had had a delivery of cattle that morning, and the usual gluey fug that wafted from the blacksmith's forge on Park Street that was neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Being absorbed by Dr. Henry Nixon's housekeeper, Clara, nobody noticed these odours. She faced the front of the Nixon household, her body rigid and prancing, arms in fists as she screeched her worst. To the onlookers' surprise, nobody emerged from the towering White House to call her in or to comfort her, and no window was drawn up. Nor did anybody watch anxiously from the parapet behind which the Nixons often enjoyed an evening cocktail on their continental-style garden roof above the town, with its carefully tended and sheltered palm trees. Each time Clara paused to catch her breath and begin again, the town fell silent. The listeners realised that normal business had ceased, since everybody else was also on full alert to her words and their import. "Henry Nixon," she shouted, "how could you do this to me?" And so the man whose house she minded, she was a housekeeper, she had become pregnant by him. They'd had a quick affair. He's a married man, and she finds herself pregnant, and now I'm moving along rapidly. She is thrown out by her father, though her mother doesn't feel that way, and she goes to a convent in the Midlands, a fictional convent in the Midlands, to stay until she has that baby. But she has no intention of staying, and she leaves. She gets out after the birth with the baby. Though her experience, I wanted to give a different portrayal of one of these places where women go, because remember the Irish state had not been set up really in 1919, and the role of the Catholic Church was still at a remove when it came to the management of things like this. So the things we've heard about in recent years would not, I think, have been a feature as strong, really, I don't think so. So she's had a good experience there, but she still escapes. And she's taken in by a progressive woman, and she is sent to work on the Bog of Ireland, the Bog of Allen, picking moss. Each day she was collected in an old army cart with a canvas roof and a small churn of fresh milk attached to one side. The driver, whose name was Dillon, never spoke. She did not know his first name. It seemed nobody else did. All that was known about him was that he had seen action in Europe in early 1916, and that while crossing the Mediterranean on a troop ship, his vessel was torpedoed and sunk. More than a year later, he occasionally offered scraps of his story as he muttered erratically to people about being adrift on a lifeboat. When he was rescued, he was taken to Alexandria, where he spent 2 months recuperating from head wounds. Now, a metal plate covered part of his brain, Mrs. Conroy explained, and he never removed his hat because his skin had never been properly replaced. He was still in shock and would probably remain that way. Clara thought he would have been a dashing-looking fellow in uniform, and perhaps if he were dressed differently and had his hair cut, he still would be. But Dillon's silence suited Clara, who needed time to settle and consider her own position. She did not feel calm or happy at first, when so much that was uncertain lay ahead. Dillon also collected 3 other workers for the day. There was a widow whose husband had died at the Somme and who rarely spoke either. Some days she wept silently, and her tears were like a steady leakage from her eyes and down the sides of her nose. There was also a disgraced priest who had left his religious order and was trying to fit into normal society again, far away from his own community. Beside him in the cart, there usually sat a deaf-mute boy of 16. She felt safe with her companions in the cart. The widow, she thought, might never recover from her husband's death, and as for the priest, there was no place for him, and all he had apparently done was change his mind about his vocation. Only the deaf-mute boy might be safe, she thought, or perhaps not. Sometimes when a person couldn't speak, bad things happened to them. And even though she could speak, there were things she would never be able to utter for the rest of her life, or if so, only to a limited few. The bog was peppered with people bending down, picking the sphagnum. The labouring bodies stretched out a long way from where she was working during her first weeks, backs stooped over the plants as they moved along slowly, picking. She was given a basket by the overseer, a man from Antrim who also showed her exactly what the moss looked like and how not to remove anything other than moss. Just moss, he said. Just moss, she echoed. The ground was very wet that first day. She worked alongside the widow and the deaf-mute boy. The priest was brought over to a different area by the overseer, who then returned for some time to observe Clara and her companions as they work. The wind whipped across the plains, bringing drenching rains in its wake. Soon, water was trickling steadily from the heavy India rubber rainwear fastened around Clara's neck and draped down along her back. The days passed, chopping the minutes in little pieces, so that not for one moment did she sense she was getting anywhere. But where could she get to? Filling the baskets was no problem, but wondering where the sphagnum would go was another matter, and she felt stagnant. Yet even in grim weather, the green around her was vivid and inviting, and she imagined what a soft bed it would make in a dry summer if one had an opportunity to sleep beneath the stars. Then she scolded herself for being so romantic. She had long given up on romance, and even Patrick Joseph, that's her son, his startling resemblance to his father, something she occasionally thought might change Henry Nixon's attitude were he to be presented with his own flesh and blood, did not deter her from the belief that she must carry on alone. At 1 o'clock they stopped for a break. Another cart arrived with huge pots of boiled potatoes that were still quite warm, particularly if you managed to get the ones from the middle and not the top of the pot. There was fresh milk and fresh buttermilk. Although her back ached by evening time, as the weeks passed, she began to think that the overseer was right. He said, "There are sick men yet all over the world, and we're playing our wee part." They were playing their part. Even if there had been chaos in Dublin when the rebels had fought 3 years earlier, even if they had been scandalously executed by the British, there were the tail ends of this other greater war. They must still remember the thousands of Irishmen who went to Flanders and to France for the sake of defending what was right. One day, to her surprise, the widow spoke while they were gobbling down their dinner. "Nobody in Ireland has the slightest idea of what it was like for the men," she said. Clara did not speak. She waited. Their wounds were so terrible that ordinary bandages were not adequate, the widow explained. Their flesh rotting and running, their burns terrible, men squealing like stuck pigs with the unmerciful pain. I know that from my dead husband's letters. It makes me proud to work here. I imagine that some man will be healed by our bandages, and he is some woman's sweetheart, even if the war is past. There's that at least, Clara replied, uncertain of what to say. It seemed to encourage the widow. She rooted in one of her pockets and withdrew an envelope which she proceeded to open. "To think they started out so well," the woman said softly, holding 2 sheets of paper in her hand. "Would you like to hear what he wrote? This was at the beginning, you know." Clara nodded. "My darling," the widow read, "I received your welcomed letter and was glad to see by it you are well and in good health, even if missing me. I am feeling well, with the exception of my loneliness for you, my sweet. You will be surprised to read that we have landed in Leamington Spa since Jan and expect to leave on the 20th. There is some rumour that we don't leave until the end of the month. It may be sooner or later, and it don't matter as all is ready. I thought we may miss action until the weather would be better. It is horrid to be in trenches in cold weather, not mind wet. However, pot luck, most of the lads here have seen Indian action and other places. There is nothing like having the hard nut, the green un is easier cracked. We are having a glorious time here, even if we miss our beloveds, much as I hate to tell you such things, but it is the truth. The finest place I have seen. Yes, splendid people. No barracks here, all billeted in houses. I am in a large confectioner's, something to make you smile, my dear, knowing my love of sweet things, so plenty of jam tarts and ice cream. We have theatres by the dozen, picture gallery even. We partake of some spa, well, when we feel that way. This is the famous Leamington Spa here. We can get to a hall every night, open from 2 to 10. You can get a cup of tea and about 4 ounces currant cake for 1 halfpenny. 1,001 of such places. We will feel lonesome when we leave. My darling, I am sending my old army papers to you for safety, until, that is, if I return. But don't fret, I intend to return, and the Hun will not best me. I have no more at present, but I remain yours as always. You are in my heart and soul, and on my return we will have such times. I am thinking of the family we will have, dearest, and the children that will make us even happier than we are. Fondly and adoringly, your Jamesy. Now, I'll leave it there. I've probably run over, but thank you very much for your attention.